Hello and welcome to another Takeda episode of The Eternal Law. On the last Takeda episode, we saw Kenshin Uesugi be ambushed twice by Takeda Shingen. This led to him being apparently so spooked that he surrendered the Uesugi clan to the Takeda, the Uesugi having lost most of its territory whilst Kenshin was on campaign. In the west, huge Ikko Ikki armies were spotted overrunning the Oda clan. With the war in the north resolved, Shingen moved the Takeda army down south to continue the war with the Hojo. He attacked one of the newly acquired castles that the Hojo had taken from the Satomi. In the battle, Shingen used distractionary forces to hold Hojo men back, while some of his other men captured the Tenshu, immediately claiming the castle. Finally, Nobushige had an army stationed to prevent the Tokugawa invading Kai. In this time, it is evident that peace can only be achieved if the clans work together. The give and take of fighting will be endless otherwise. I know you understand this. So now we three, Takeda, Uesugi and Yamanouchi, shall be back to back against the divided nation, keeping each other afloat on the waters of chaos. We each have our own ambitions, but we can sculpt our own futures so that all make gains and can find satisfaction. Uesugi heads north, Yamanouchi heads east, while we Takeda hold the center and attack the south. What can stop us? So we're joining the Takeda once again in the autumn of 1551. We can see Nobushige here is in an ambush position, facing off against the Tokugawa army, which is threatening the castle at the center of Kai. Here's the situation with Shingen. He's captured the Hojo territory. His main threat is the Hojo main force, which is around here attacking the last Satomi stronghold. It could double back and try and take back its lost gains. And of course there are Hojo here to the west as well. We don't know anything about what forces they have stationed in that area. Here's Shingen's army. It's relatively healthy after the attack last turn, but it's going to need 1 to 2 turns to get back to full strength. And now it's actually time to end the turn and see whether Nobushige's ambush will trigger against the Tokugawa. The Tokugawa instead decide to run away, and we'll find out why they do that in a moment. We also see here the Anagakoji decide to declare war on us. This is very bad news. We have just lost a lot of security up in North Shinano with this. The Yamanouchi and the Uesugi are going to join the Takeda for this war, since they are our vassals. So we have a little bit of support. The Yamanouchi decide to send a Metsuke over to start harassing the Anagakoji. However, their main force has other ambitions. They actually intend to attack the Hojo, so they're going to start moving their forces south to join Shingen on his battlefront, which is kind of annoying because we could have used them up in North Shinano. So as the turn ends, we see we've lost our trade agreement with the Anagakoji, which makes sense. And here we see that Nobushige and his reinforcement army have been discovered. And that probably means that Tokugawa army that just retreated from us had found out about Nobushige's ambush plan and decided not to advance because they knew they were going to be ambushed. And that's why they suddenly abandoned the province without any warning. So the Tokugawa force is hiding out of view somewhere, and we're going to have to be careful to see what it's going to do next. Here's the Anagakoji stronghold at Hida. It doesn't have any garrison whatsoever, so it's possible that Nobushige here could sneak up and take it. That'd be a nice early gain in this war to really stick it to the Anagakoji for declaring war on us. So with this in mind, I moved some forces up from North Shinano up to the border and gave Nobushige command of all of them, and I sort of just had to wait. It looks like he can attack during this turn, so I needed to make a decision about that. I also decided to send Nobushige's reinforcement army up north towards North Shinano in order to take part in any future engagements with the Anagakoji war. Now I need to make a decision about what to do with Shingen's forces. It looks like he can leave the castle. There's enough public order in the area that if the Takeda army leaves, there won't be any rebellions or anything. You can see we now have access to the first port. This is the first territory that the Takeda have controlled, which has a port built on it. So I'm building a Bokuboya to act as a scout. I'm also recruiting some forces to defend the castle. Now first I moved Shingen and his forces over towards the Hojo lands to see if I could see any Hojo armies just within the border. I couldn't see anything. Shingen is able to attack the enemy's stronghold there this turn. However, it was very risky because I know nothing about the level of defenses they have there. And if I walk over there and then decline to attack, suddenly I have Shingen's main force cut off from reinforcements and losing men to winter attrition. So instead of attacking, I decided to just attack their farmlands to damage their economy and rile them up a bit and move him back. I decided to make Nobushige do his attack, but then this happened. A huge Anagakoji army was waiting in ambush. The Anagakoji, it seems, have pulled an open fort strategy on me. I was very surprised that they did this and somewhat annoyed. But now I have to face the facts that Nobushige and his army are about to be wiped out. We cannot retreat, we're heavily outnumbered and outmanned. Things are not going to go well in the next battle. Those taunts. It's the Anagakoji. Damn Shingen and his orders. Does he think himself the only one capable of a deceitful attack? What should I do? A breakout formation could. No, there are too many of them. There's only one way to go then. Spearmen! Double echelon formation facing our rear. Everyone else form up inside. Do not let them take your life without dear cost. So the ambush begins. The Anagakoji came from two sides against Nobushige's column. I formed all of Nobushige's forces up into this double echelon formation, with spears providing a wall of defense for the softer insides of the formation where the swords and bows were. Immediately the enemy cavalry charged the spear wall. I thought the spears would hold them off, but no, the enemy's cavalry charge was too heavy. They actually broke through the spear wall almost completely in their first charge. I had to plug some of the gaps of my own cavalry. Over here, a similar deal is happening, where my men are just being pushed back by the sheer weight of the enemy's charge. However, now the enemy are bogged down within the spear formation. Some of them are going to die, and a lot of the enemy cavalry in this battle were defeated. However, that doesn't really help because the enemy has tons of heavy infantry who are going to slam into my light infantry here and just start cutting them down with very few casualties once they break through the initial wall of spears these Ashigaru are offering. Over here, right on the edge of the echelon, we can see that the enemy's heavy infantry, made up of Naginata samurai, are starting to slice through my spear wall. And of particular interest are these Onabushi, the female soldiers. I think this is the first time we've seen these guys on the battlefield, or these girls, sorry. These are super elite warriors. Usually only the best of female samurai were allowed to fight on the battlefield, and they usually were supposed to be fighting in defense of their castle, although in this case they seem to have come out onto the battlefield to take part in this ambush. So you can see how the echelon is formed up here. It's holding for the moment, but you can see my ranks are beginning to thin. The enemy ranks on the outside of the echelon are thicker and heavier than mine, so I realized by this point it was inevitable that I would be defeated. This spear wall would not hold for very long. I had so few reserves on the inside. I think I had a unit of bows and a unit of lone sword Ashigaru, so two very light units which won't really be able to plug any gaps that arise. You can see here the enemy have almost completely broken through these long Yari Ashigaru, so we're in a bit of trouble. Just a little bit later you can see the echelon has now pretty much collapsed. The whole west side of the echelon there has gone. Actually I think that's the east side. And the other side is almost gone. You can see the Takeda forces are down to just a single line of men, and they're actually beginning to rout at this point. It's not going to be hard for the enemy to finish off the stragglers, and well, there they go. So the echelon has collapsed, and this means all the remaining forces are going to be attacked from all sides by this ambushing force, and will last less than a minute, I believe. So things were going pretty bad. At this point I decided to take Nobushige and just rush him out of the battlefield, because I didn't want him to die in the ensuing slaughter that's about to occur. Just a few lone sword Ashigaru and bow Ashigaru are left fighting here in the centre, but they're fighting with Naginata samurai who are easily outclassing my men and just going to slice them down. My men realise this is the case and decide to just flee. But of course this actually proves to be an even bigger mistake, because they're just fleeing into more ambush forces and they're going to be eaten up by the enemy as they try to escape the battlefield. This is not good news. So after about 5 minutes of fighting, only a few men survive. One of those men is Takeda Nobushige. Quite fortunately, him and half of his bodyguards are still alive, and they're rushing through the forests on the north side of the map, trying to escape from the enemy. The enemy general here is pursuing on his own. All of the enemy general's bodyguards were killed. However, the general himself seems so eager to take Nobushige's head that he's charging after him on his own. A very risky maneuver. And I decided to exploit this by turning Nobushige and his guards back to fight with this general. You can see he's immediately surrounded by my men. However, at the top right you can see enemy forces are coming down the hill to support him. He had a whole bunch of samurai coming up through the trees behind him. They arrive and I decide Nobushige needs to get out of there. However, as a nice parting blow, one of his guards completely destroys the enemy general. So this is a very nice conciliatory blow to the enemy to destroy their general as we escape. So Nobushige and his horsemen make an escape. I had one other squad of horsemen who escaped off one of the other sides of the map. As for the rest of the army, almost completely routed. A few odd stragglers from the various units will have survived, but for the most part there's nothing left. However, I can still technically win the battle and thus allow Nobushige to not be destroyed if he can just escape the enemy forces for 40 minutes. Because that's all you have to do to have forces survive an ambush, is have them not be killed for 40 minutes of fighting. So Nobushige now begins his escape. The enemy is going to be pursuing him with his whole army, but he really needs to make it off the battlefield and back to Matsumoto to get some revenge on the Anakakoji. Let's see if he can do it. The screams of my men echoed on our backs as we rode. 3 times in the first minutes of the escape I tried to turn back. My men grabbed my reins and pulled me away each time. Icy shards tormented the hooves of our steeds, but they were spurred on by the unending clatter of our pursuers. We rode through forests and fields, always losing our foe, but seeing them approach again when we stopped to rest. It was a long way to Matsumoto, and there was no time to hunt, but I had resolved to keep going for one reason: to avenge the thousands lost on that grim day. No longer could I entertain peace. The Anakakoji must die. And so, a very long time later, Nobushige continues his escape. The Anakakoji formed up their army in battle formation as if they really needed to, on the central plains of the map, perhaps just to show off. But it did give me an opportunity to see how much damage I'd done to the enemy ranks during the ambush. I think I probably killed about a third of them. Some of their units are heavily depleted, some of them are relatively untouched. So he did inflict a few casualties, but really this has been a horrific battle. But Nobushige himself is still alive, sneaking through some trees not far from the enemy force. However, he is being directly pursued back here by some samurai. However, they're too far away and they don't have the energy at this point to really continue pursuing. They're just running on their last leg. They're exhausted, it says here on the tooltip. So Nobushige is able to escape, and as the battle ends he rushes off. He's going to be rushing back towards Matsumoto if he can, and none of his men are going to be going with him. A very costly victory, as it says on the screen. So hopefully Nobushige will have learned a lesson from this defeat. Will now be more inspired to take on the Anakakoji in the future. So let's head back to the strategy map and see exactly how many men we lost. The battle report isn't good. You can see almost everyone is gone or deserted. Nobushige survives with just a few horsemen and some lone sword Ashigaru who also somehow managed to escape the enemy slaughter. The enemy lost about 800 men, whereas we lost pretty much our entire army of around 2,000. So a very poor battle for the Takeda forces, and now Nobushige is trapped out in the middle of Anakakoji territory. The only good news is that a statue was erected for the battle, and the statue was in the honor of the Takeda, so I guess the statue was in honor of Nobushige for surviving. So it's very kind of the local people to do that. Now Nobushige is trapped in enemy territory. His surviving men are going to suffer winter attrition there. I've lost so many men already, it's not really a problem anymore to lose. There's additional few that will die out in the snow. So that's all really for this turn. I did also want to quickly throw a bit more recruitment up in North Shinano now that there's very few men left to guard it. I thought I'd throw in some cheap Ashigaru just to fill out the ranks. And it's time to move on to the next turn. So as we pass into spring, the Tokugawa army appears down in Musashi and decides to attack Shingen in his castle. I guess this is the same Tokugawa army that was challenging Nobukado earlier and fell back. So at least now we know where they are, and perhaps Nobukado can exploit the fact they're not defending Suruga. Before we can do that, we have to try and allow Shingen to survive this battle and preferably keep the castle in our hands. The enemy have about the same numbers as us, but their forces are heavier with much more samurai. However, we do have the cavalry advantage and the defenders advantage, so let's see what we can do with those two pieces of ammunition. And so the defense begins. A fairly standard formation from Shingen, simply deploying troops on the wings of the castle in order to deal with any enemy incursions. The enemy incursions appear to be coming from two sides, the first of which is over on the far west, where the enemy have their main force, their generals and all of their cavalry positioned, with a mix of infantry leading. At the same time, right on the other side, on the east side, a little bit hard to see because they're popping in and out of vision because they're trying to sneak up on us, but they're too big to actually do so, is the other enemy detachment. It's also mixed infantry, Ashigaru samurai, of various qualities. So in order to deal with this, I'm moving troops over to the east wall here, ready to stop them coming up. At the same time, I'm using a cavalry diversion tactic on the west side. You can see I'm moving all of the cavalry outside of the castle so they can get ready to move around. My plan is to try and divert some of the enemy's heavy infantry away from the walls, because I do have the infantry disadvantage, and if they attack, especially on the more open west side of the castle, they'll probably be able to win. Over on the east side, we can see the enemy are deploying the heavy Nodaichi samurai, who are extremely deadly warriors who are effectively cavalry. They excel in charging, which means they're kind of weak in a siege battle, but they're still going to be very difficult to deal with, especially because I have mostly Ashigaru to defend against them. Over on the west side, a bow skirmish has begun between my bow Ashigaru and the enemy's bow samurai, of which there were a fair number. And my guys are getting wiped out even though they're in cover because the bow samurai are just so accurate. The enemy are rushing their heavy infantry towards the wall, and this meant it was time for me to really start the diversionary tactics. I moved my cavalry a little bit close to their formation to try and draw their attention, and once it looked like they were turning to try and attack my cavalry, I rushed the cavalry away again, so I'm effectively turning them around onto the south side of the castle. They pursued mostly with their cavalry and a few units of infantry over here. They also managed to distract units way over on the east side who decided to prevent their attack and come around to fight my cavalry. Not all of them, you can see some of them have already begun their assault on the walls, but a significant change has been made to the enemy's attack plan. So this is already good news. Now a cavalry melee began as the enemy's cavalry decided to engage mine. However, mine is pretty much all superior, especially in this bit of the fight, where the enemy's light Naginata cavalrymen are fighting with the Takeda fire cab, who is going to annihilate those lightly armoured enemies. So it was kind of in my interest to keep this fight going, because I was going to gradually wipe out the entire enemy cavalry force. Basically because my cavalry were all anti-cavalry cavalry, whilst the enemy had anti-infantry cavalry, which wouldn't be as effective. The enemy are beginning to scale the west walls, and I fell back to defend a position further inside the castle, both so I could get more bow support from the second tier, and to be further away from the enemy's bow samurai, who were completely annihilating my troops at this stage. Over here you can see my cavalry formation was about to be surrounded by the enemy's infantry who came over from the east side, so I had to rush them out and rush them down the hill just to get out of that situation. Otherwise they would be crushed from two sides, especially by the enemy spearmen moving up from the east. So they start leading the enemy down the hill and away from the castle. At the bottom of the hill they encountered the enemy's subordinate general, who decided he really had to fight with us. So I decided to let him, because as I said I have anti-cavalry cavalry who are going to really womp on this enemy general bodyguard. I believe the subordinate general here was killed in this melee, but I had to then run away because the enemy's spear infantry was coming up to support. But you can see my plan has worked. I've drawn away a massive body of the enemy infantry from the fight up at the castle, so this is definitely good news. Plus my cavalry are going to do a few raids in a moment, which is going to further amplify their usefulness. Over on the east side, the enemy are actually starting to get inside the castle, because as I said, they do have the man-for-man advantage, and they're starting to hack through my troops, especially because I was focusing mainly on defending the second tier. So the troops on the first tier were really just to slow them down, whilst these archers up here cut them down. You can see I have more troops ready to defend the second tier here. The enemy started attacking from a new angle, so I had to adjust my formation slightly. But they are going to have a hard time getting up that wall, because I have quite a lot of heavy troops further inside the castle who can come to help out. Over on the west side there weren't that many enemy infantry units attacking, so many were drawn away. However, those that did attack did very well, because they were being supported by bow samurai. So the samurai on both sides were kind of annihilated in this fight. You see there are bodies everywhere and only a few katana samurai remaining. It's almost impossible to tell what's going on, because both the katana samurai of the Takeda and Tokugawa are wearing red, with no real identifying features. The shades are ever so slightly different if you look closely. But anyway, the fight did end in my favour. However, I was paying more attention to this. The enemy general, who had deployed all of his reserves, so he was on his own, decided to attack my cavalry detachment as I was trying to bring it back inside the castle. So I changed their trajectory attack the enemy general, and I believe in this melee the enemy general is going to be defeated, so that's going to sap their morale. Over here on the east side, I've deployed Lone Sword Ashigaru onto the ramp up to the gatehouse to stop all these enemy Ashigaru from getting up and burning it down, or having an easy time going up the wall.
Their general has fallen! A cutting blow!
We get the message there about the enemy general falling, and I believe at this moment a couple of the enemy units retreated immediately upon hearing the news. The ones already inside the castle aren't really in any position to retreat, and they fought on. They were doing a very good job of fighting. I actually lost loads of men in this defense. Basically, I think they were just very experienced troops that they were using, who were well able to cut down a lot of my Ashigaru. You can see here the Takeda cavalry is now returning to the castle. They were almost tempted to go and fight these bow samurai, but my guys were exhausted and depleted in numbers. I needed to get them back to safety, at least for a while, to give them a chance to rest. So they rush inside. The enemy shoots a few flaming arrows at them, but that's not going to stop anything. Over on the east side, the whole enemy force starts to rout because they're so isolated from the rest of their army, and they're off outside the castle with a few arrows chasing them. And so all my forces on the east side I can now reposition into the central area on the west side of the Tenshu to defend against the new enemy assault that they're beginning. They began by moving their bow samurai up inside the castle to again skirmish with my bow Ashigaru. However, this time I had a much easier time, basically because the enemy bow samurai were on flat ground rather than a hill, so they presented a large target because of their positioning. And you can see the enemy bow samurai are being cut down by my Ashigaru's arrows. Over here, the enemy's remaining melee infantry decided to begin assaulting the corner of the inner sanctum. But of course I still had samurai remaining to defend against them on the inside, so I deployed some katana and yari samurai to start fighting with the enemy's attackers. Some of them were yari ashigaru, the enemy forces. I think there were enemy bow samurai who climbed up inside here as well. You can see these yari ashigaru are cutting down my katana samurai. Now this is a sight you do not often see. These enemy troops must be elite because they're cutting through samurai, even though yari ashigaru are weak against katana samurai specifically. Katana samurai are the perfect unit for fighting yari ashigaru, so kind of annoying. This enemy force is really putting up a fight. However, their actual formation has pretty much broken up. They're just attacking in pockets now, and it's very easy for me to coordinate a defense against them, especially with so many arrows suppressing the enemy. They're just not really sure what to do. And sure enough, after a while, victory was mine. You can see at the end, Shingen rushed into the fighting himself and started cutting down a few enemies, collecting some heads for him and his men. But ultimately, all of the Tokugawa forces who had made it inside the castle tried to retreat and started being cut down by the Takeda Ashigaru manning the walls. So a decisive victory, heavy casualties as we saw and we'll see on the strategy map, but still the castle at Musashi remains in our hands, and this means there are opportunities for Nobunaga to possibly exploit the Tokugawa's open position, but let's see whether he does that back on the map. It was with apprehension that I announced that our Lord Nobushige had survived the Anagokoji ambush. I thought the people might think him dishonoured for living while his army is eaten up by the snow. But the reaction was quite different. Cheers of jubilation and relief sounded around the marketplace, and at dusk there were many ceremonies wishing our Lord a safe return. It seems the people of Matsumoto town know a good ruler when they see one, and are not blinded by military code. This war has not tainted the spirit of Shinano. So now let's look at the battle report from that siege defense. We can see we lost quite a few of our units here. A lot of them were annihilated, including one of the cavalry units, which is kind of sad really. But of course the entire Tokugawa army was defeated according to the report. So we've made a good profit in allies lost to enemies killed. And Shingen of course is gaining ever more experience. The Uesugi, you can see, are now marching into a winter attrition territory. They're really desperate to attack the Date clan. But of course I had my own problems down here. Nobushige's army was attacked by an Anagokoji main force. However, he had enough movement points somehow to retreat into North Shinano, so he managed to survive yet again. I get a bonus here saying I'm going to have 4 turns of faster art research. I decided to research Form, which is a military art which allows you to deploy more advanced forms of cavalry, which for the Takeda is going to be an excellent thing. We can start deploying what are called the Great Guard Cavalry, very elite horsemen. So here's the situation down near Musashi. The Hojo army is quite small and stuck in this castle. The Satomi seem to have enough forces to hold them off for now. The Bokaboya I built in the last turn is now able to scout out the enemy. We see that there's a small Tokugawa force and a small Hojo force guarding this castle here, but nothing really to worry about. Down in Izu there's no Hojo forces at all apart from the castle's town garrison, so the Hojo don't appear to have any visible forces, which is very interesting news. Back up at North Shinano, I have to deal with the situation that the majority of my defending forces have been killed. So you can see there, I brought up some of the forces from Kai to station in the castle. Nobushige himself, I'm putting him in hiding not far from the castle in an ambushing position. Now I'm going to start moving forces between Nobushige's camp and the castle to balance things out a little bit. Basically have a cavalry army outside the castle that can support any siege battles by rushing in and doing some distractionary tactics, whilst having the castle not too heavily fortified with a standing army, so that there's enough command space to call up more garrison units should the enemy attack. This basically maximizes the total number of troops I'm going to have at my disposal. If either of these two giant Anagakoji armies attack, or both of them, the Anagakoji were looking very strong in this sector, so I was actually fairly worried because Nobushige's force isn't currently strong enough to stop them. So there's very limited things I can do to stop this. I decided the easiest one is going to be to move Nobukado up to defend North Shinano, and this is going to prove to be a very apt decision later on for a variety of reasons. But of course it means I've lost my opportunity to attack Suruga and take it from the Tokugawa, and it leaves Kai very exposed. Luckily we know the Tokugawa don't have a force nearby that can attack, or at least not that we can see. So we'll have to see how that develops.
Consider my words with care, and likewise your response.
Now the Ikko Ikki suddenly offer me a strange deal. They want to trade, but they also want 10 turns of military access to my lands. And I thought that's not a very good deal, but I was looking at the top right and seeing that the Ikko Ikki are one of the most powerful clans in the country, so I decided instead to offer them trade in exchange for alliance.
Your proposal has much to commend it. Yes, we agree to your terms.
They were quite happy to enter into alliance, so this is quite good for me. The Takeda have gained a very powerful ally to the west, and this is basically the reason why that is important. The Oda clan have been destroyed. That means the Ikko Ikki have replaced them, and we now have borders with the Ikko Ikki and could potentially be under threat from their rampage. So let's just watch this Oda video for their clan defeat. Sad to see the rivals of the Takeda in this series defeated. So it's all over for Oda. Too bad. Now here's what replaced them. 2 massive Ikko Ikki armies in South Shinano, led by very high level generals. Extremely worrying, so this is why I was glad that I'd randomly decided to offer that military alliance, because if I hadn't, these 2 armies could be coming down on North Shinano at the same time as the Anagakoji armies, and then it would pretty much be over for the Takeda. In North Shinano I position both Nobukado and Nobushige's forces in ambushing positions near the castle, assuming the Anagakoji are going to attack. Will they? Well, you'll have to find out on the next Takeda episode. That's all for this episode of The Eternal Law. Join me next time where we'll be seeing the Oda forces try to finish off the Ikko Ikki and face an invasion force larger than anything we've ever seen so far. That's next time on The Eternal Law.